The gym was completely silent. Not the good kind of silence that comes with peace, but the heavy kind that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. 20-year-old David sat on the wooden bleachers, staring at the polished court where his dreams had died just 6 months ago. His knee still ached when it rained. The doctor said he was lucky. Lucky, that was the word they kept using. Lucky that the tear wasn't worse. Lucky that he could still walk. Lucky that he didn't need a third surgery. But David didn't feel lucky. He felt like someone had ripped his entire future away and handed him back a participation trophy. The college scholarship was gone. The scouts who used to call his phone had moved on to the next talented kid. His teammates had finished their season without him, and life had simply continued as if he'd never existed. David had packed his bags, left campus, and returned to the neighborhood he'd worked so hard to escape. South Philadelphia looked exactly the same. The same cracked sidewalks, the same boarded-up shops, the same group of guys standing on the corner at all hours. His mom had cried when he came home, but not because she was happy to see him. She cried because she knew what coming back meant. It meant her son's ticket out had been canceled. Now David worked as a janitor at Lincoln Middle School. Every morning at 6 he unlocked the building and started his rounds. Mop the hallways, clean the bathrooms, empty the trash cans, wipe down the desks. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when college coaches were shaking his hand and promising him a future. The worst part wasn't the work itself. David didn't mind cleaning. The worst part was being invisible. Students rushed past him like he was part of the furniture. Teachers barely nodded in his direction. He was just the janitor, just another guy who didn't make it. David tried to avoid the gymnasium during practice hours. The sound of basketballs hitting the court made something twist in his chest. But sometimes his cleaning schedule forced him to push his yellow mop bucket past the open doors. He couldn't help but glance inside. Couldn't help but watch the kids run their drills. Couldn't help but notice when someone's footwork was sloppy, or when a pass could have been better. That's how Coach Patterson first noticed him. The old man had been running the middle school basketball program for 30 years. He had a weathered face and tired eyes, but he never missed a thing. He saw David pause at the doorway, saw the way the young man's eyes tracked the plays, saw the slight shake of his head when a kid took a bad shot. At first, David didn't realize anyone was watching him. He'd stop for maybe 30 seconds, observe the practice, then force himself to keep moving. But it became a habit. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:30, his cleaning route took him past the gym. And every Tuesday and Thursday he stopped to watch. One afternoon, Coach Patterson walked over while David was wringing out his mop. The coach moved slowly, like every step required consideration. He was at least 70, maybe older, with white hair and hands that trembled slightly. "You played," Coach Patterson said. It wasn't a question. David kept his eyes on the mop bucket. "Long time ago. Not that long." "You're what, 20? 21 next month." Coach Patterson nodded slowly. "College ball?" David's jaw tightened. For about 5 minutes, the old coach didn't push. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching his team run through a drill that was falling apart in real time. 3 kids were arguing instead of playing. 2 others were sitting on the sidelines on their phones. The assistant coach looked ready to quit on the spot. "Worst team in the district," Coach Patterson said quietly. "Have been for 6 years running. Most of these kids can barely pass their classes, let alone run a proper play." David didn't respond. He started pushing his mop bucket toward the door. "I could use some help," Coach Patterson called after him. David stopped but didn't turn around. His hands gripped the mop handle tighter. "I don't coach anymore," David said. "I'm not asking you to coach. I'm asking you to help. Big difference. I appreciate it, but no thanks." David walked away before the old man could say anything else. He finished his shift, clocked out, and took the bus home to the small apartment he shared with his mother. She was already gone, working the evening shift at the hospital. A note on the refrigerator reminded him there was leftover rice and chicken inside. David ate alone in front of the television, but he wasn't really watching. He kept thinking about those kids in the gym, kept thinking about how lost they looked, kept thinking about Coach Patterson's words. That night, David lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His knee ached. It always ached at night. He thought about the player he used to be, the player who could have gone somewhere, the player who had let everyone down, including himself. He thought about those middle school kids who didn't even know how to run a basic drill, Kids who probably came from neighborhoods just like his. Kids who might be looking at basketball as their only way out, just like he once did. David rolled over and tried to sleep. Tomorrow was another day of mopping floors and being invisible. Another day of watching other people chase dreams while his collected dust. But something had shifted. Coach Patterson's offer sat in the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Maybe helping those kids would be a distraction. Maybe it would remind him too much of what he'd lost. Maybe it would hurt even more than doing nothing. David closed his eyes and told himself he'd made the right choice by saying no. But sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it finally did, he dreamed of basketball courts and second chances he didn't deserve. 3 days passed before Coach Patterson approached David again. The old man appeared in the hallway while David was changing the light bulbs in the science wing. He didn't say hello. He didn't make small talk. He just looked up at David on the ladder and spoke. Lost another game yesterday, 42-18. David twisted the new bulb into place and climbed down. Sorry to hear that. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking for your time. Coach, I already told you, 2 hours, twice a week. That's all I need. David shook his head and picked up his toolbox. I'm not the right guy for this. Why not? Because I failed. Because I couldn't handle one injury without falling apart. Because those kids deserve someone who actually made it, not someone who washed out before his career even started. Coach Patterson was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You think those kids need someone who succeeded? They see successful people on TV every day. They see highlight reels and trophy ceremonies and scholarship announcements. You know what they don't see? They don't see someone who got knocked down and had to figure out how to stand back up. David stared at the floor. I haven't figured that out yet. Then maybe you figure it out together. The words hung in the air between them. David wanted to walk away. Wanted to finish his shift and go home and forget this conversation ever happened. But something about the way Coach Patterson was looking at him made it impossible to move. 1 month, David finally said. I'll help for 1 month. But if it's not working, I'm done. Coach Patterson's face didn't change, but his eyes lit up just slightly. Fair enough. Practice starts at 3:30 tomorrow. That night, David couldn't eat dinner. His stomach was twisted in knots. He kept asking himself why he'd agreed to this. What did he possibly have to offer a group of middle school kids? He was a 20-year-old janitor with a bum knee and no future. He was the last person who should be teaching anyone anything. The next day dragged by. Every hour felt like 3. When 3:30 finally arrived, David changed out of his maintenance uniform and walked slowly toward the gymnasium. His limp was more noticeable when he was nervous. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The noise hit him first. 12 kids were scattered across the court, and maybe 3 of them were actually playing basketball. The others were wrestling, arguing, or sitting on the bleachers, completely checked out. Coach Patterson stood at center court with a whistle around his neck, looking exhausted. When the old coach saw David, he blew the whistle. The sound echoed through the gym, but only half the kids stopped what they were doing. Listen up, Coach Patterson called out. This is David. He's going to be helping me with practice. One kid, tall and lanky with an attitude written all over his face, laughed. That's the janitor. Show some respect, Tommy, Coach Patterson said firmly. Why? What's a janitor going to teach us about basketball? David felt his face get hot. This was a mistake. He should have trusted his instincts and stayed away. But before he could turn around and leave, another kid spoke up. This one was shorter, stockier, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. You played college ball, didn't you? The kid asked. David nodded slowly. For a little while. What position? Point guard. What school? David hesitated. Temple. That got their attention. Even Tommy stopped smirking. Temple was a big deal. Temple had produced professional players. Temple was where local legends were made. Why aren't you still there? Tommy asked, his tone less mocking now and more curious. David tapped his knee. Got injured my freshman year. That was the end of it. The gym got quieter. These kids knew what injuries could do. They'd all seen someone lose their shot because of a bad break or a wrong landing. Coach Patterson stepped in. David's going to work with you on fundamentals. Footwork, passing, defensive positioning. The basics that will make you better players. The practice that followed was a disaster. The kids barely listened. They argued with every instruction. They complained about running drills. 2 of them got into a shoving match that David had to break up. By the time 4:30 rolled around, David's head was pounding and his knee was throbbing. As the kids filed out, Tommy walked past and muttered just loud enough for David to hear, "Waste of time." David stood at center court after they were all gone, breathing hard. Coach Patterson sat on the bleachers looking even more tired than before. "I told you I wasn't the right guy," David said. "You are. You just don't know it yet. Coach, those kids don't respect me. They don't want to be here. Half of them can't even dribble properly. You're right. They don't respect you yet. But respect isn't given on the first day. It's earned over time." David shook his head. "This is going to take more than a month." "I know," Coach Patterson said quietly. Before David could respond, his phone rang. It was his mother. She sounded panicked. Something about a letter from the landlord, something about rent going up, something about not being able to afford the apartment anymore. David told her he'd talked to her at home and hung up. He looked at Coach Patterson, defeat written all over his face. "I can't do this right now. I've got my own problems to deal with, we all do," the old coach said. "But sometimes helping someone else with their problems helps us figure out our own." David didn't believe that. He walked out of the gym convinced he'd never come back. One practice was enough. He'd given it a shot and it had failed just like everything else in his life lately. But the next day, something strange happened. During lunch, David was cleaning tables in the cafeteria when he overheard two of the basketball players talking. The quiet kid with the intense eyes was explaining a defensive drill to another student. He was using the exact words David had used during practice, the exact technique David had demonstrated. The kid had been listening. Even when it seemed like no one cared, at least one person had paid attention. That afternoon at 3:30, David found himself walking toward the gym again. He told himself he was just checking to see if Coach Patterson needed anything. Told himself he wasn't actually going to practice. But when he pushed open those doors and saw the kids warming up, saw Coach Patterson's face light up with relief, David knew he was lying to himself. He was back. And this time, he wasn't leaving after one day. Coach Patterson handed him a whistle. "Glad you could make it." David took the whistle and looked at the 12 kids on the court. They were loud, unfocused, and completely unprepared for what real basketball required. But they were here, and so was he. "Let's try this again," David said, blowing the whistle. "Everyone to center court, now." This time they all came. 2 weeks into helping with the team, David got the call that changed everything. He was restocking paper towels in the teacher's lounge when his phone buzzed. It was Principal Andrews. "David, I need you in my office now." The tone made his stomach drop. He abandoned the supply cart and headed straight to the main office. When he walked in, he found Principal Andrews standing next to a hospital bed phone, her face pale. "It's Coach Patterson," she said quietly. "He had a heart attack this morning. He's stable, but he's going to be out for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer." David felt the room tilt. "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors think so, but he needs rest. Complete rest." She paused, studying David's face. "I need you to take over the team." "What?" "No, I'm just the assistant. I've been helping for 2 weeks. I don't know what I'm doing. You know more than anyone else in this building. Those kids are counting on this season. We can't just cancel the program. Get another coach. Get someone qualified." Principal Andrews shook her head. "There's no budget for it, and even if there was, we're 2 weeks into the season. You're already there. You know the kids. They're starting to listen to you." David wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The truth was he'd seen small improvements. Nothing major, but small signs that the team was starting to come together. And now Coach Patterson was in the hospital, and these kids were about to lose the one stable thing in their lives. "I'll do it until Coach Patterson comes back," David said. "But that's it. The second he's cleared, I'm out." That afternoon, David stood in front of the team alone for the first time. No Coach Patterson to back him up. No experienced mentor to turn to when things went wrong. Just him and 12 kids who looked confused and worried. "Coach Patterson is going to be fine," David started. "But he needs to rest, so I'm going to be running practices for a while." "You mean the janitor is our coach now?" Tommy said, his tone sharp. Something inside David snapped. Not with anger, but with honesty. He was tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't. Tired of acting like he had all the answers. "Yeah, the janitor is your coach. You know why I'm a janitor? Because 3 years ago I was exactly where you are. I had a dream. I had talent. I had a full scholarship to play Division I basketball, and then I tore my knee apart, and everything I'd worked for my entire life disappeared in about 10 seconds. The gym was dead silent. Every kid was staring at him. I came home and I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd let everyone down. My mom, my old coaches, myself. So I took the first job I could find, and I've been mopping floors and fixing toilets for 6 months while watching everyone else move forward with their lives. David could feel his throat getting tight, but he kept going. Coach Patterson asked me to help with this team, and honestly, I didn't want to. Basketball reminded me of everything I lost. But then I started watching you guys, and you know what I realized? You're not playing basketball. You're going through the motions. You're showing up because you have to, but you don't actually care. That's not true, the quiet kid said. His name was Chris. I care. Then why don't you push yourself? Why do you settle for good enough when you could be better? Chris didn't have an answer. David looked at each of them. I'm not a real coach. I don't have the credentials or the experience, but I know what it feels like to waste potential. And I know that every single one of you has more potential than you're showing right now. Tommy crossed his arms. What do you know about our potential? You don't know anything about us. You're right. I don't. So tell me. That caught Tommy off guard. What? Tell me about yourself. Tell me why you're here. Tell me what basketball means to you. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. It's just a game. If it's just a game, why are you here 4 days a week? Why do you get angry when we lose? Why do you argue with your teammates when they mess up a play? Tommy didn't answer. David turned to Chris. What about you? Chris looked down at his shoes. My dad played basketball. Before he went away? Went away where? Prison. He's been there since I was 8. The words hung in the air. David hadn't expected that. He should have, though. He knew this neighborhood. He knew the statistics. He knew that most of these kids were dealing with things no 12-year-old should have to deal with. Does he know you play? David asked quietly. Chris nodded. I write him letters about it. About the games. About what I'm learning. He writes back with advice sometimes. David felt something shift in his chest. Then we better make sure you have good things to write about. One by one, the other kids started talking. Kevin's mom worked 3 jobs, and basketball practice was the only time someone actually supervised him. Rachel was in foster care and had been moved 5 times in 2 years. The team was the only constant in her life. Antonio lived with his grandmother because both his parents had addiction problems. These kids weren't just playing basketball. They were surviving, and basketball was their escape, their community, their hope. When practice started that day, David didn't run drills. Instead, he talked to them about what it meant to be a team. Not just in basketball, but in life. He told them that a real team showed up for each other. A real team held each other accountable. A real team didn't let anyone fall behind. Starting tomorrow, we're doing things differently, David said. If you're on this team, you're going to maintain at least a C average in all your classes. If your grades drop, you sit out until they come back up. That's not fair, Tommy protested. This is basketball, not school. This is life, David corrected. And in life, you don't get to do the fun stuff if you're not handling your responsibilities. You think college scouts care about players who can't pass basic classes? You think anyone's going to give you a chance if you can't show up and do the work? He looked each of them in the eye. You want to be on this team? Prove it. Not just on the court, but everywhere. Be someone your teammates can count on. Be someone who doesn't make excuses. Be someone who shows up even when it's hard. And what if we can't? Rachel asked quietly. What if we're not good enough? David thought about his own journey. The injury. The scholarship. The months of feeling worthless. Then we figure it out together. That's what a team does. Practice that day was different. The kids actually tried. They listened to instructions. They encouraged each other instead of tearing each other down. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. As they were leaving, Tommy stopped at the door and turned back. Coach? It was the first time anyone had called him that. David felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on us. David watched him go, and for the first time in months he felt like maybe he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That night, David visited Coach Patterson in the hospital. The old man looked small in the bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. How'd practice go? Coach Patterson asked. It was rough, but we got through it. They listened to you? David thought about it. Yeah, I think they do. Coach Patterson smiled. That's because you stopped trying to be someone you're not. You stopped trying to be the perfect coach with all the answers. You just showed up as yourself. I told them about my injury, about losing everything. Good, that's what they needed to hear. David sat down in the chair next to the bed. I don't know if I can do this, Coach. You're already doing it. But what if I mess up? What if I let them down? Coach Patterson reached over and gripped David's hand with surprising strength. Then you apologize, you learn, and you try again tomorrow. That's all coaching is. That's all life is. David nodded, fighting back the emotion rising in his throat. Get better, Coach, we need you. No, the old man said gently. They need you. And I think you need them too. Walking out of the hospital that night, David realized Coach Patterson was right. He'd spent 6 months feeling sorry for himself, convinced his life was over. But maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning in a way he never expected. The team started winning. Not every game, but enough to matter. More importantly, they were becoming something David had never expected. A family. It started small. Chris began tutoring Kevin in math after practice. Rachel organized team dinners where everyone brought something from home to share. Antonio, who'd been the quietest kid on the team, became the unofficial team photographer, documenting every practice and game with his phone. And Tommy, the kid who'd given David the most trouble at the beginning, became the team's heart. He pushed everyone to work harder. He was the first one at practice and the last to leave. He held his teammates accountable when they slacked off. David created something he called the Brotherhood Code. It was simple. Respect everyone. Show up on time. Maintain your grades and have each other's backs. The team voted on it together and everyone signed a poster that David hung in the locker room. For 3 months, things were good. Better than good. The team won 6 games in a row. Parents started coming to watch. The principal mentioned the team's improvement in the morning announcements. Kids who weren't even on the team started showing up to practices just to watch. David felt something he hadn't felt since before his injury. Purpose. He woke up excited to go to work. He stayed late planning practices and studying game footage. He checked in with his players about their grades and their home lives. He wasn't just coaching basketball. He was coaching kids through life. Coach Patterson came back to watch a game in his 4th week of recovery. David saw the old man sitting in the stands with a blanket over his lap, and his eyes got watery. After they won, Coach Patterson came down to the court. You're a natural, he told David. Those kids would run through walls for you. I learned from the best, David replied, but Coach Patterson shook his head. I taught you some plays. You taught them how to believe in themselves. That's something no playbook can do. Everything changed on a Tuesday in late November. David was in his tiny office, really just a converted storage closet, when Principal Andrews knocked on the door. Her face was serious. We have a problem. Tommy was caught shoplifting at the convenience store on Broad Street yesterday after school. David felt his stomach sink. Is he okay? He's fine. The store owner called his grandmother instead of the police this time. But David, this is his 2nd offense. 1 more and he's looking at juvenile detention. What was he stealing? Food, bread, milk, peanut butter. His grandmother's disability check didn't come through this month, and they're struggling. David put his head in his hands. Tommy had been doing so well. His grades were up. His attitude had completely changed. He'd been talking about trying out for the high school team next year. What happens now? David asked. That's up to you. He violated the Brotherhood Code. The team has to decide his consequences. David called an emergency team meeting after school. The 12 kids sat in a circle in the gym, and David explained what had happened. He watched their faces as he spoke. Some looked angry. Some looked sad. Chris looked like he might cry. According to our code, we all agreed that actions have consequences, David said. Tommy broke the law. He made a choice that could have serious repercussions. The question is, what do we do about it? We have to suspend him, Rachel said quietly. That's what we agreed to. If someone messes up off the court, they sit out until they make it right. But he was stealing food for his family, Kevin argued. That's different than stealing for himself. It's still stealing, Chris said. The code doesn't say unless you have a good reason. It just says we hold each other accountable. The debate went on for 20 minutes. David let them talk it through. This wasn't his decision to make. The Brotherhood Code belonged to all of them. Finally, they voted. It was close, but the decision was clear. Tommy would be suspended from the team for 2 weeks. He could still come to practice, but he couldn't play in games. He had to write an apology letter to the store owner and do community service. Tommy took it hard. When David told him privately after the meeting, the kid's tough exterior crumbled. "I was trying to help my grandmother," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "She hasn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to ask for help," David said gently. "You were supposed to come to me or Coach Patterson or Principal Andrews. You have a whole team of people who care about you, and you tried to handle it alone. I didn't want to be a burden. That's not how teams work. When one person struggles, we all step in. That's the whole point." That night, David used his own money to buy groceries for Tommy's grandmother. He showed up at their apartment with bags of food and helped put everything away. Tommy's grandmother cried and hugged him for 5 minutes straight. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I did. Tommy's my player. That makes you family." Over the next 2 weeks, David visited Tommy every day after practice. They'd sit on the apartment steps and talk about life, about choices, about the difference between giving up and being knocked down. "I let the team down," Tommy said during one of those conversations. "You made a mistake. That's different. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do after. What if they don't want me back? They voted to suspend you because they care about you. If they didn't care, they would have just kicked you off the team. They're holding you accountable because they believe you can be better." Meanwhile, the team struggled without Tommy. They lost both games during his suspension. The energy was different. They missed his leadership, his intensity, his voice calling out plays. Chris came to David after the second loss. "We need Tommy back. He'll be back next week. He served his time." "I know, but I'm worried he won't come back. I saw him yesterday and he looked broken, like he thinks we hate him." "Do you hate him?" "No, I miss him." "We all do." David thought for a moment. "Then maybe you should tell him that." The next day, the entire team showed up at Tommy's apartment. They'd coordinated without telling David. They brought food, school supplies, and a card that everyone had signed. "We're family," Rachel told Tommy. "Family doesn't give up on each other," Tommy cried. These tough kids from a rough neighborhood all stood in a circle and cried together. And then they hugged and they promised to have each other's backs no matter what. When Tommy returned to the team the following week, he was different, humbler, more grateful, more focused. His first game back, he scored 15 points and had 8 assists. But more than that, he thanked his teammates after every good play. He encouraged the younger kids. He was becoming the leader David had seen potential for all along. After the game, Tommy pulled David aside. "Coach, I'm sorry I let you down. You didn't let me down. You hit a rough patch and you came out stronger. That's not failure. That's growth. I want to be better, not just at basketball, but at everything." David put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Then let's work on that together." The season continued. The team kept winning. More importantly, they kept showing up for each other. When Kevin's mom had to work late, Rachel's foster family started giving him rides home. When Antonio couldn't afford new shoes, the team pooled their allowance money to buy him a pair. When Chris got a letter from his dad saying he might get early release, the whole team celebrated like they'd won a championship. David watched all of this unfold and realized something profound. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost, the scholarship, the career, the future he'd planned, that he'd missed what he was gaining. These kids had given him something he didn't know he needed. They'd given him purpose. They'd given him a reason to wake up every morning. They'd given him a chance to make a difference. One night, David sat in the empty gym after practice looking at the Brotherhood Code poster on the wall. All 12 signatures were there, including his own at the bottom. He pulled out his phone and texted Coach Patterson, "Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." The old man replied immediately, "That's what coaches do. We see potential where others see failure. You're doing the same thing for those kids. I'm proud of you." David sat there in the quiet gym, his knee aching like always, but his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. Maybe his basketball career had ended before it really started, but maybe that wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just the beginning of a different chapter, one where he helped other people write their own stories. The losses, the pain, the disappointment, all of it had led him here. And here, he realized, was exactly where he needed to be. The district playoffs were 2 weeks away, and Lincoln Middle School hadn't made it to playoffs in 7 years. The team was nervous but excited. They'd worked harder than anyone expected, and now they had a real shot at something special. David pushed them in practice, but not the way he'd seen other coaches do it. He didn't scream or intimidate. He challenged them to be better versions of themselves. When someone messed up, he asked them what they learned from it. When someone succeeded, he made sure the whole team celebrated together. Coach Patterson attended every practice now, sitting on the bleachers with his notebook, occasionally calling out advice but mostly just watching David work. The old man had fully recovered, but he'd made it clear that this was David's team now. "You've earned it," Coach Patterson had told him. "These kids don't need me anymore. They need you." The first playoff game was against Riverside, the second-ranked team in the district. Lincoln had never beaten them. David gathered the team in the locker room before the game started. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "This is going to be the hardest game you've played all season. Riverside has better resources, more experienced players, and a winning tradition. But you know what they don't have? They don't have what we've built here. They don't have our brotherhood." Tommy stood up. "We've got this, Coach. We didn't come this far to back down now." The game was intense. Riverside jumped to an early lead, and by halftime, Lincoln was down by 12 points. David could see the doubt creeping into his players' faces. They were tired. They were frustrated. They were starting to believe they didn't belong here. During halftime, David didn't talk about basketball. He talked about their journey. He reminded Chris about the kid who used to be too scared to take a shot and was now their top scorer. He reminded Kevin about how he'd raised his math grade from an F to a B. He reminded Rachel about how she'd gone from being the quiet new kid to being the voice that held everyone together. "This game isn't about winning or losing," David said. "It's about showing everyone, including yourselves, that you belong here, that you're not the worst team in the district anymore, that you're fighters." They came out in the second half like a completely different team. Tommy's defense was suffocating. Chris hit 3 shots in a row. Rachel's passes were perfect. With 2 minutes left, they'd cut Riverside's lead to 3 points. The gym was packed. Parents, teachers, students, everyone was on their feet screaming. David's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. His knee was killing him from pacing the sideline, but he didn't care. With 30 seconds left, Kevin stole the ball and passed it to Chris, who drove to the basket and scored. 1-point game. Riverside called timeout. David gathered his team. "Whatever happens in the next 30 seconds, I'm proud of you. You've already proven everything you needed to prove. But we can win this," Tommy said, his eyes blazing. "We can actually win this." David smiled. "Then let's do it." Riverside inbounded the ball and tried to run out the clock, but Antonio forced a turnover with 10 seconds left. Tommy grabbed the loose ball and called timeout with 7 seconds remaining. The play David drew up was simple. Get the ball to Chris, let him create, and trust him to make the right decision. When play resumed, everything happened in slow motion. Tommy inbounded to Kevin. Kevin passed to Chris. Chris drove right, drew 2 defenders, and kicked the ball back out to Rachel at the 3-point line. Rachel had been practicing that shot for months. David had stayed late with her countless times, working on her form, building her confidence. She'd never taken a big shot in a game before. She was shaking as she caught the ball. "Shoot it," Tommy yelled. Rachel shot. The ball arced through the air as the buzzer sounded. It hit the rim, bounced once, twice, and fell through the net. The gym erupted. The team rushed Rachel, mobbing her at center court. Parents were crying. Students were chanting. Even the Riverside coach came over to shake David's hand. "That's good coaching," the man said. "Your kids played with heart." Lincoln won their next playoff game, too. They didn't win the championship. They lost in the semifinals to the top-ranked team. But nobody cared. They'd made it further than anyone thought possible. They'd proven that with the right support and the right mindset, kids from struggling neighborhoods could compete with anyone. The season ended with an awards ceremony in the school auditorium. Every player received a certificate and a small trophy, but the biggest moment came when Chris walked to the microphone to give a speech on behalf of the team. 3 months ago, we were the worst team in the district, Chris said, his voice steady. People looked at us and saw kids who wouldn't amount to anything. But Coach David saw something different. He saw potential. He saw a group of kids who just needed someone to believe in them. Chris paused, his voice getting thick with emotion. "My dad is in prison. He's been there most of my life. But I write him letters about basketball, and he writes back. Last week, he told me he's proud of me. Not because we won games, but because I didn't give up. Because I found people who cared about me and I let them help me be better. Chris looked directly at David. Coach, you taught us that losing doesn't make you a failure. Giving up makes you a failure. You lost your scholarship and your career, but you didn't give up. You found a different way to matter. You showed us that setbacks don't define us. How we respond to them does. The auditorium was silent except for the sound of people crying. David's eyes were burning with tears he was trying not to shed. We're not just a basketball team, Chris continued. We're brothers and sisters. We're a family. And that's because of Coach David. He didn't just teach us how to play basketball. He taught us how to be better people. The applause was deafening. David walked up to the stage and all 12 kids surrounded him in a group hug. Principal Andrews presented him with a plaque that read, Coach of the Year, for seeing potential where others saw failure. After the ceremony, David found Coach Patterson outside the auditorium. The old man was leaning on his cane, smiling that quiet smile of his. You did good, son, Coach Patterson said. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You just needed someone to give you a push. Coach Patterson put his hand on David's shoulder. I'm retiring at the end of this school year. I want you to take over the program full-time. David's eyes widened. Coach, I'm not certified. I don't have a teaching degree, then get one. The district will help pay for your education if you commit to teaching here. You've got something special, David. Don't waste it mopping floors when you could be changing lives. That night, David sat at his kitchen table with his mother. He told her about the offer, about the possibility of going back to school to become a teacher and a coach, about building something meaningful instead of just getting by. His mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, who'd never complained when he came home from college with his dreams shattered, looked at him with tears in her eyes. I always knew you'd find your way, she said. I just didn't know what it would look like, but this is perfect for you. 3 years passed. David completed his teaching certification while coaching. The basketball program grew. More kids wanted to join. More parents got involved. The team made the playoffs every season, and while they didn't always win, they always competed with heart. Several of David's former players earned high school scholarships. Chris became a star player at the local high school and started getting letters from college scouts. Tommy became a peer mentor, helping younger kids avoid the mistakes he'd made. Rachel went into foster care training, determined to help kids like herself find stable homes. David, now 24, stood in the same gymnasium where he'd once felt like his life was over. But this time he was surrounded by kids who saw him as proof that failure isn't final. He was living proof that when one door closes, another opens if you're brave enough to walk through it. Coach Patterson, now fully retired, came to every home game. He sat in his usual spot in the bleachers, watching his protege work with the same patience and wisdom he'd once shown. After one particularly good practice, David sat next to the old coach. You knew, didn't you? That first day when you asked me to help. You knew I needed this as much as they did. Coach Patterson smiled. I knew you were lost. I knew you were talented. And I knew that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to help someone else find their way. Thank you, David said simply. Don't thank me. Thank yourself for having the courage to try again after everything fell apart. That's the real victory here. As David walked out of the gym that evening, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Chris. Coach, my dad got early release. He's coming home next month. He wants to meet you. He said you saved my life. David sat in his car for a long moment, letting the words sink in. He thought about the kid he'd been 3 years ago. Broken, angry, convinced his life was over at 20. He thought about the man he'd become. A teacher, a coach, a mentor to kids who needed exactly what he'd needed when he was lost. His knee still ached on cold days. He still had moments when he wondered what his life might have looked like if he'd never gotten injured. But those moments came less often now because he'd discovered something more important than the dream he'd lost. He'd discovered his purpose. And sometimes purpose matters more than plans. Sometimes the life you end up with is better than the life you imagined. Sometimes getting knocked down is just the beginning of standing up in a way you never knew you could. David started his car and headed home, already thinking about tomorrow's practice. Already thinking about the next kid who might walk through those gym doors feeling lost and hopeless. Already knowing that he'd be there to help them find their way, just like someone had once done for him, because that's what coaches do. They see potential where others see failure, and they never ever give up on the people who need them most.